if a client asks us to enable the data API, and we've had various clients do that, in the era we live in now, that has become exponentially more dangerous. They probably did just what a lot of people are going to do. They've got this FileMaker app. They're trying to leverage new AI dev tools, and so they say to themselves, "Oh, we'll just enable the data API, enable the data API, and then tell Claude to do whatever it wants." And probably did something along those lines, and all of
Well, we built a big API integration for them, so that's what it's using those calls that we built. So.
Right, but the endpoints, we don't know why we don't know what they're doing. Well, maybe you do, and maybe is a really specific example. I mean, my concern is that it'll become more common. We haven't had very many clients ask us to enable the data API. Those two are the two that occur to me. There probably is another one that I'm not thinking of, but when a client asks us to do that, we are inviting what happened because, I mean, you guys check my logic on this. All you have to do is tell Claude, connect to the data API on whatever. And, I did it recently with PBS Tracker. I told Claude that I wanted the things I wanted to do, and it established the data API connection to Tracker with no trouble whatsoever. And it just works. But all I'm trying to do is query some a very tiny bit of data once per night and update one little tiny value once in a while. It's a trivially insignificant bit of stuff. But I could have just as easily told it, Claude, I want to report every hour summarizing the time entered by my team in the last 2 weeks, showing me billable percentages so that I could get a picture of, I mean, every hour would seem kind of silly, but I could do it. And the churn on the FileMaker database engine for doing that work, because it probably would involve some cross-table join stuff, it would probably kill PBS Tracker. And I can imagine us running into that more often now with clients who are trying to expand the capabilities, or even ourselves trying to expand the capabilities of our client systems, especially doing some reporting. And the data API is not good at shoveling large quantities of data, especially if joins are involved. The data API is just not that good at providing data to the consumer at that point. And I can just imagine this becoming more of an issue that we should be aware of, that when a client says, "Hey, can you turn on the data API?" that shouldn't just be a flip the switch. Yeah, okay, we did it. It probably should require consultation with them to understand what they want to do and make sure it won't kill the server. That's the long-term concern that I had coming away from that, why I threw it on the agenda. So throwing that out there for discussion.
So, John, does that mean that at some point you might think about creating a policy about data API and hosting?
Well, I think, I don't know about policy, but I think the policy should be that we have to consult with the client about what they're going to do with it.
At least for now, yeah, at a minimum.
At a minimum, yeah.
It's a good argument to have the API only call scripts, like something we'd have to build out so they can get their data that way, but not just giving them access to a raw endpoint to query the database directly.
And I also set it up with permissions so that the credentials used only have access to that layout and or table or records or whatever.
I guess my biggest question would be, does everybody share the same concern, or does it feel like I'm overly worried about it?
No, that's a valid concern. I haven't really thought that far about it, but yeah, you're right. With API or with AI tools, you could query those APIs, real quickly as much as you told it to.
Oh yeah, it raises an interesting point from a network infrastructure perspective. We don't really have a way to rate limit the API calls or anything like that.
Right.
It's technically a bit of a DDoS attack vector. To be honest.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really, really high risk. Really, really cool to know that you can implement that, but at the same time, high risk. And just, yeah, like, because it's so easy in Claude to tell it, set this task up to go every 15 minutes and just check for orders and then send an email. Or, because now you can do it just like we would have done with, N8N. But the downside is if it's in the client's hands, they could be asking it anything, and yeah, there's no efficiency on the code, and yeah, without real tight constraints, it could get misused really quickly and hose their solution.
Yeah, I can just imagine it. I can imagine it being a perhaps frequent problem is an overstatement, maybe, but I could imagine it being a somewhat common problem. It's just so easy now. And
Yeah, high risk.
Yeah, because think about security concerns if it's not locked down for that data API. I mean, basically, you just gave something that could crawl every table, every record. So if you're whatever you're storing in those records, if there's sensitive information, it's suddenly being exposed to Claude. I mean, it is normally right to the internet, but the credentials kind of keep it on par, and whoever's writing the request to the credential using those credentials is sort of key. But if Claude's able to do it, now suddenly it could be like, it can scan all kinds of stuff. At the same time, it is bouncing up to the Claude server. So if it's not being handled properly on the Claude side, it is exposing that data to the LLM. So there's security concerns there too. Same as and this isn't just specific to Claude. You can use any of the LLMs to do this, right? But the security concern is the same.
yeah, I did it with Tracker. I mean, you could argue I shouldn't have done exactly what I did with Tracker. I mean, it flies in the face of what we have sort of been leaning towards as a best practice, which is to not provide access to the main file, but instead to provide access to an API specific file that's locked down a lot more tighter than the main file.
What was the problem specifically? Like, was it that Claude was sending nonstop requests to it, or was it sending a few really complex requests?
It was more of the nonstop. So it wasn't Claude. There's a third party partnered with that is querying our database for data, and it was just too many requests, basically. It was keeping the CPU usage at about 90% or higher, and was just causing some issues on that machine.
Was it keeping a session open, or is it disconnecting the session? I wonder if we looked at the logs close enough to see if it's actually closing those sessions. Because if it's keeping a session open, that would make sense. But it should close them every time.
Well, we were getting hit by two different IPs.
Oh,
Set. So it looked like they were querying us from two different areas.
oh, interesting.
So we were getting hit by two different data API sessions simultaneously. And that was it, right? Like, FileMaker didn't show a lot of stuff, but the machine was grinding to a halt. And looking at Task Manager, it was showing that FileMaker server was eating up like 80% of the resources, but then the data API was eating up the rest. And as soon as those connections dropped, everything calmed down. So it was a little bit misleading as to what the actual cause was. But anytime API connections dropped, the server recovered.
Well, we can look at that API log and see what the endpoints are calling and see if it's a specific one that's actually, I wonder if that report in John that you had sent tells what the endpoint is that is most used.
I don't know.
Does the log show the endpoint that's being called?
It does, yeah.
Okay, then yeah, we could easily figure that out if we need to.
Yeah, it looks like the query find is what the top call shows, but the API log should actually show the endpoint being called.
Yeah, I didn't try to do anything with the API log. I have it.
Okay.
I can send it to you if you want.
Oh, it's fine. We can look it up, but
That's where that log analysis web app is a little bit handy. The thing that lets you truncate the log files to a specific number of days is
Yeah.
a little bit handy. Let's see, the cards find endpoint is the main one by far. 45,000 calls in 3 days.
Yeah.
That's that's double the next two, which were a session login and a session log out endpoint. So yeah, that underscore find is really all they're doing.
Okay. With the experiences we've had with the C-system data API stuff, I feel like the FileMaker data API may not be as dependable as we like, maybe.
I think it's dependable. I just don't think it's very performant. FYI, they're doing that every 15 minutes.
Oh, okay.
They get
I
3
mean-
connections to us right now, and we're not hitting very high CPU usage though. So maybe they had a bug on their side that was
Maybe.
worth
It's-
knowing.
To me, the big smoking gun on the data API, if you ask me, was our experience. It was doing when users. I mean, it wasn't a timed operation. It was something triggered by the action of a user. But when when a user did a particular action, it triggered. I don't remember the number. It triggered 2 or 3 calls to the server, but it was trying to build a grid of numbers. And the way the data was stored in the database, or I should say is stored in that database, I think it's fairly logical from a schema standpoint, but it requires 2 or 3 finds to get all the data. So the 2 or 3 endpoint calls each required 2 or 3 finds, and we did some testing, and that use case FileMaker could only handle perhaps 2 concurrent calls, but before performance degraded so far, the whole thing became useless. I don't know that that's the data API itself. I think that's probably that's the Draco engine. It's just not the fastest thing on earth.